My name is Jamie Kowalski. I'm a classically trained composer. I'm also a songwriter and a huge modular synthesizer enthusiast. I've got quite a number of videos on this channel with modular synthesizer and a few older ones with some of my classical pieces. So this subject has come up a couple of times in conversation with some of my modular friends. When I talk about a particular aspect of classical music and my training in classical music and how it is applied when I work on a patch. And it's always met with some interest. And so I thought I would share this because I don't know how many people who are into modular have the kind of classical background that I do. Although I would be curious if you have some classical background, I'd like to hear about that and how it crosses over into your modular work. So I think this video is for modular enthusiasts who are curious about classical and classical musicians who are maybe interested in getting into modular. In any case, I hope there's something here that you can take value from, and let's just get started on these different disciplines. I've got a little tier list going here. This isn't necessarily a complete list of everything you could possibly study. It certainly isn't a complete list, but it covers, first of all, everything I was trained in, as well as a few other things that I haven't been trained in, but things that are going to come up more often in a course of study, things that are easier to find information about online. So let's just get going here. So I think acoustics as an area of study helps a little bit just in that it's good to know how physical materials interact with sound. It's good to know how to mimic spaces. It's good to know what to listen for to get a clean sound. That may have to do with understanding how different wavelengths interact with different spaces. And it can't hurt, right? So I'm gonna put acoustics here in B. I may change that up later. I have to think about that. But let's move on to analysis. Now, when I talk about analysis, I'm talking about looking at a piece of music and dissecting it, understanding how the chords function, understanding modulations and other features that are within the written score you're looking at, and putting it within a framework where it can be compared to other musical passages. And that's what I talk about when I talk about analysis. It gets deeper than that, of course, but that's what we're talking about here. So I think analysis, it probably doesn't really help you very much in modular, because we're not talking about looking at a Beethoven piece and figuring out how to do it in modular. We want to create something new. And of course, people do classical music in modular. It's sort of a side subject I hadn't really thought about, but it's not what I'm talking about here. If you're doing that, then of course, all this stuff is important to you. You should learn it, and then you should take that knowledge to modular and write the pieces out. But that's, of course, not how I'm viewing this. So analysis is, I'll put it in C. It's not quite a D tier because it helps to be able to understand, to dissect chord progressions, for example. You might hear something, you might say, well, how can I get something like that into what I'm doing on my modular? It's a little bit of stretch, but I don't feel like I can quite put it in a D tier. All right, next we have the circle of fifths. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into exactly how the circle of fifths work. It's usually a pretty early subject to learn when you're learning music. But I feel like I've got to rate this kind of highly. It's, I'll give it a B. I think it's useful to know. So let's just move right on. And we're going to go right to composition. Now, obviously, as a composer, composition is the most important thing to me. It's not just about how do you write a melody and harmony. All of these areas of study are under the umbrella of composition, but I do put it as its own category as well, because studying composition gives you so many tools that you can take into any other area of music. Here, for categorizing this, I'm going to consider it everything related to writing and orchestrating music. This is going to go in S tier, I'm sorry, because it just covers everything. Now, you can't very easily just go out and quickly study composition. It's generally undergraduate. It's going to be 4 full years of hard study in many different disciplines. But if you do go that route, you're going to have a lot of tools in your toolbox. All right, next up we have conducting. Now, I took conducting. It was fun. I liked it. It has a strange connection in my mind to when I work on modular, because I always feel like when I'm working with my synthesizers that I want to get them to a place where they're sort of playing with me. I feel like I'm not just setting up melodies and harmonies and rhythms, but sort of deciding when something is coming in, when something's going out, how things balance well. It gives you a sense of rhythm as well. So I think I'm going to have to give conducting maybe a B. Counterpoint. All right. I love counterpoint. I loved every class I took in counterpoint. If you don't understand exactly what counterpoint is, it's learning to get the horizontal part of music, which is the melody, or in this case, multiple melodies, and getting them to behave in a way where the vertical part, the alignment, the harmonies, all makes sense. And it's the main point. I think the reason we have counterpoint and counterpoint studies, the goal is not just to impose arbitrary rules about how voices can move. You're not allowed to have parallel fifths or parallel octaves. Many, many, many rules. It's not just rules for rules' sake. The point is to get voice independence. Now, why do you want voice independence? Well, maybe you don't. But it does make things sound good. I mean, it's not a requirement to make good music. Certainly not. And it's not used a lot in popular music. It's used very little. I think my training at counterpoint, I've used a little bit in some of my modular stuff. Sometimes I think about voice leading when I've got some pre-planned parts. But even though I love counterpoint a lot, I'm going to have to give it a D. Sorry, counterpoint. Yeah, something had to go there. All right. Dictation. This may be a new one for some of you. Yes, you can study music dictation, which is being able to hear a piece of music and write it out. Write out what you hear. It doesn't apply much. Gotta say, it really, I'm gonna have to give dictation. I think it's a D. I mean, you can make some kind of argument where you heard somebody do something in their music, and you quickly want to write down the idea so you can use it when you get home to your setup. Yeah, okay. It might help you, but for this, it's got to be a D. What's interesting is that ear training and dictation, they're really sort of two pieces of a whole. So if you're taking an ear training class, part of that class is probably going to be dictation. But the ear training as a whole is much more useful. It's going to teach you what different intervals sound like. It's going to help your sense of pitch in general, your sense of intonation. Just conditioning your ears to understand what they're hearing. And that can't hurt, right? I mean, I'm going to put that up in S tier. Even though we got this overlap, we got these polar opposites in usefulness. You go to your ear training class and you say, well, half of this might help my modular. All right, moving on. Engraving. Engraving is just writing music down, having it look good on the page, understanding all the symbols. I don't have to talk too much about this. I think we all know what it is, and I don't think anybody will be too surprised if I leave this down in D. Ensemble work. I've played in a lot of ensembles in my life. I've been in several different orchestras. My main instrument was French horn, and I put this in as a category because I think you learn a lot. Your ears learn a lot when you're playing with other people. You learn how to fit your part into the whole of the piece of music, how to adjust your intonation to fit in with the other players, how to adjust your dynamic level, matching articulations with other people in your section, following a conductor. So you learn a lot, and I think the most important thing is that you can listen to the part you're interested in. This is how it translates in my brain. I've got something going on in the module. Let's say I've got a groove going, I've got a bass line or something, and I'm putting something else in. When you're adding a new part, that's your focus is really on that. But I think it's important to maintain a high enough level of attention to all of the parts that are going on and say, how does this fit in exactly? And I think that's going to have to, maybe let's make our first add to the A tier. Okay, form. I'm going to write a canon. I'm going to write a fugue. What is sonata form? These are all parts of classical music that I don't think go over very well to the modular world. Just as a small confession here, form was always sort of a weak point for me. Not that I didn't understand it, but when I was writing, I couldn't get myself to want to write in form. And it's not always necessary, but to be able to do it, to understand when you want it and apply it, probably could have helped me a little bit in some of my writing. But we're in the modular world and it doesn't help. Sorry form. All right, okay, we're getting something good here. The Harmonics series. Now, if you don't have a lot of classical studies, you know what the Harmonics series is, most likely. And you're probably saying, wait a minute, why is he bringing that up about classical music? Well, it's because it's important in classical music as well. If you're a string player, for example, if you play a violin, you'll find dividing the string in half and playing a harmonic, it's going to go up an octave. Divide it in thirds, it's going to go up an octave and a fifth. Dividing in quarters, it's going to be 2 octaves. Those pitches follow the harmonic series. Same with brass instruments. I played French horn, so I can tell you, playing a French horn, you've only got a few valves to play with. Most of the work is being done with your mouth. And what you do is you move throughout the harmonic series with a given fingering. So I think you can probably guess I'm going to rate this pretty high. In fact, let's just go ahead and put it up here in S tier. Why? Because in modular, the harmonic series is going to get you all of your wave shapes. But you can add sine waves together, going up the harmonic series with a certain ratio, and suddenly you've got a sawtooth wave. You use only the odd harmonics and you can make a square wave. And if you're more of a sound designer kind of modular person, this is important stuff to know. You really should get on it. It's going to help you. All right, music history. It's not going to have a direct effect on your modular. It's great to know stuff that's come before you. And it's great to know what sort of influences people had on music in general over time. But I don't think it's going to help you a whole lot in modular. I would put in D. I think the only redeeming factor is that when you discover new ideas in music over the course of the last 500 years, what things stuck, what things changed music, it can inspire you to think about what change could be from here on out. So, not my favorite subject, but I'll keep it off the bottom. Improvisation. I took a class in improvisation at Conservatory. Improvisation at the keyboard. And it was interesting because it was genre agnostic, I would say. It was just sort of teaching yourself to feel your way into an instrument and express yourself spontaneously. That's the best way I can say it. Obviously, improvisation factors heavily in modular. It factors heavily in most types of music. Ironically, not really a lot with classical music, which is sort of our subject here. But I put it as a category because I myself studied under classical composition umbrella. So obviously this is going to be important for us. Improvisation. And yes, you can study it. Indeterminacy. Well, that's also known as chance music. That's just introducing elements into music that aren't predefined. So you say, well, let's roll the dice and see what happens here. It's not a huge part of classical music tradition, but it did get sort of a big push middle of last century, I guess. People like John Cage, Henry Cowell, I think. If you're with me here, you know that figure's big in modular. It figures a lot bigger in modular than it does in classical music or probably any other kind of music. Got all these wonderful modules that play with chance. Throw the dice. 50%, you put out this gate. On the other 50%, you put out the other gate. If you're doing generative music, which I'm a big proponent of, indeterminacy sort of takes the place of the unknowns you might have in an ensemble. The reason a band might perform their song a little different every night is because you've got all the different members of the band, each one adding their sort of take on it, listening a little differently and playing a little differently, and the whole thing comes out fresh every night. Without something to mimic that in the modular world, we just get big repeated bars of music. And the ear gets very tired if it's not getting some variation. Indeterminacy, let's put that... It depends on what you're making. Depends on what you're making. If you're making generative music, if that's your main focus, it's going to be A or maybe even S tier. I think most people are going to find it around the B tier. And I probably shouldn't even have included this on this list because it's really more of a modular thing than a classical thing. But there you have it. It was sort of a movement in classical music for a while. Instruments, instrumental performance. So if we take your modular out of the picture, do you play another instrument? Have you studied another instrument? Now, I think it's pretty important. I think playing any instrument helps with everything you're doing in music across all genres. And the more instruments you play, especially if they're of greatly varying types, then the more you're going to get. And it applies. I mean, understanding an instrument. When you study an instrument, you really start to understand it. Isn't that sort of what you're doing with modular? You want to understand your patch. Modular is kind of a funny animal that way too, because unless you always have it patched the exact same way, you got to learn a new instrument every time you patch it up. And learning an instrument becomes easier if you've already learned another instrument. So I think pretty highly of that. I'm going to put that in A tier. All right, we're to music appreciation. This is sort of like a beginner level classical music class. It tells you what to listen for. It gives you ways to listen to music, ways to understand music. And in a music appreciation class, you're also going to be talking some about history, and you're going to be talking about some of these other things. And it's a little bit simplistic, you may think. I mean, it is simplistic in that it's the first thing you should be getting into if you're going to study classical music. But when it comes to musical appreciation of the classical genre, I don't know. It's I'm gonna have to put it in C. I want to put it in B, but it's just a tier list. Don't come for me if you think if you think I've got a nutty preferences here. Just tell me what you think in the comments. All right. Music education. I have not studied music education. I have taught some. I've taught theory and I've taught counterpoint, but I've never studied music education. Unless you want to get into teaching other people about modular synthesis, probably not gonna do a whole lot for you. I'm going to put this in the bottom here. Music literacy. All right, that means reading and writing musical notes on stabs. What do y'all think? Yeah, not so useful. I think maybe I'll put it, I'll put it in C just because you might get a manual that has music notes in it. One of your modules, like a sequencer that explains something. You want to be able to know what they're talking about. So, can't quite put it on D, but come on, it's not going to help you that much, right? All right. Musicology. Musicology is the study of other musical traditions from around the world. I did not take any instruction in musicology, but I am very interested in music around the world, and I try to take some of that in sometimes, and it's an inspiration. But I'm trying to think about how to rate musicology. I think knowing different traditions. Well, yeah, that's got to help. There's so many other things outside of Western harmony, Western tonality, and it can be a little bit of a trap to just sit in the Western tradition and say, that's all I want to know, because music is sort of an infinite space, and so far we've explored probably a very tiny part of it. And if you want to break new ground, it pays to get as broad of perspective as you can on what's out there. So I guess I'm going to put musicology as a B, just sort of a feel-good thing. It's hard to rate that one. All right, I'm going to move on to music. I'm going to put this in quotes now. Music theory, because this is all sort of music theory, right? Or most of it. If you're taking a music theory class, you're going to be talking a lot about harmony and melody and the names of different ornaments, and just there, it covers a lot of ground, and it covers some of these other categories. It's a lengthy study. I think there were maybe 5 different levels of theory where I went to school, and it's a lot of analysis, which we've already covered, and I probably shouldn't have been its own category. Who made these icons? Well, I did. Sorry. I'm gonna put it. Let's give it a B. Let's give it a B, just to get it out of the way. If you're gonna go take a music theory class, I'm just gonna help you. God, maybe it's an A. I don't know. I'm gonna give it an A, just cause it's my list. That's where it's going. All right, orchestration. Orchestration, very near and dear to my heart. I loved studying orchestration. Well, you've got to know a lot of things. You've got to know the specifics of all the different instruments of the orchestra. For example, lowest note they could play, highest note they could play. How many are usually in an orchestra? Are they louder at the higher register or louder and lower register? How do the instruments interact with each other? What ways do they blend? What's a typical passage for the instrument? And I think, here's what I'm going to say. I think it's really, really useful. Because even though these instruments you study in classical orchestration are not any that you'll be using in your modular setup, it gets you a certain sensibility about how things work together. And I think that's just what we're doing in Modular, right? I mean, you've got all these amazing different sounds you can create. Each one is like an instrument. Well, how do they work together? Do they work together? Could they work better together? What steps can you take to make them work better together? So, orchestration is going to be A. Scales and modes. I think probably a lot of you know a bit about scales and modes. It's pretty early stuff when you're studying theory. Learn how scales work, how modes work. And it's still very useful in Modular because, for example, you're using your quantizers and your sequencers together to make a melody, and you want, for example, two melodies to work well together, or a melody to fit into some kind of typical harmony. If you understand how scales work, how modes work, you just dial in what you need and you're off to the races. So scales and modes, we're going to give you an A, and we're going to move on. Okay, serialism. So, always have to take a drink before I talk about Schoenberg. Serialism is a technique that was sort of pioneered by Arnold Schoenberg and the Vienna School. And the idea is you have a set of pitches. Typically, you use all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale, and you give them an order, and the piece of music you write is based on that order of pitches. You don't repeat a pitch until you've played all of the other pitches in the set. And then there are variations to that set. You can start it on a different pitch and transpose it. You can invert it so that all the rising intervals are now falling intervals, and you can reverse it or play it in retrograde, or any combination of those. Okay, so the way I think of it is this. It was an interesting idea, and some great music was written with it. It never should have been a school of music. They were still teaching this stuff when I was at conservatory. That was the 80s, and I imagine they're still doing it now. And I'm not sure why anybody would write using, at least why you would write it using the specific set of rules that Arnold Schoenberg talked about. But maybe you could get something out of that. I think the concept of serialism, perhaps outside of the 12-tone Viennese school, maybe there's something there. So I'm not going to give it a complete D. Somebody out there is going to hate me for this and say, oh, serialism's awesome. I use it all the time, Modular. That's great. You know, everything is individual to you. You're allowed to rank these however you like. And I encourage you to talk to me about what you think of these or how they apply to your work. All right, sight reading. I don't know why when I talk about sight reading, people always give me dirty looks. I think it's because I played in a couple of rock bands, and I'd have ideas for pieces, and I wanted to write down something for the guitars. It's like, no, I'm not going to read that and play it. I don't know. You know, sight reading, it's kind of scary, actually. The idea is put the music in front of you. You've never seen it before. Okay, play it off the page. Yeah. Doesn't help you. And it doesn't help you in Modular. How could that possibly help you? I don't know. All right. Sound design. We're getting a little bit outside of the realm of classical study, but I'm going to put it in there in my list just because it is something you can learn at conservatory. And we all know where it's going. I don't think I need to talk about this too much. What we're doing, we're designing sounds, right? Okay. All right, we've reached the end of the list here with vocal training. I am not a trained vocalist. I have sung. I've sung in choirs, and I've sung in rock groups, and I had a very brief solo career as a songwriter, and I'm not a great vocalist. I can stay on pitch pretty well. I can blend pretty well, but just don't put me in the front. I'm a good backup singer. So what does this untrained vocalist think about vocal training? Well, it's pretty important if you're going to be a vocalist. But if you're going to be a modular person, not so much. I would put this in the bottom, but I think, here's what I think. I'm going to put it up just one, because singing is really the closest you can get to music. There is no closer. It's coming from inside your body. You're breathing it. You're literally breathing music. And that has to spill over, I mean, to anything else musical. So it's hard to make a direct connection to modular, but I'll keep it off the bottom tier for you vocalists out there. So that's my list. That's all I got to say. These are the superpowers. I do want to say that you don't need any of these. You absolutely don't. People make fantastic music with modular synthesizers, not knowing a lick of theory, any of this stuff. I just think it's great to have more tools. So I'll keep filling my toolbox up with stuff I learn, and if it makes my music better, then I'm happy. So I'll see you all later. I hope you enjoyed this, and do drop me a like or subscription. That would be very helpful to me, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Bye.